This morning I'm going to talk to you a little about a movie. I'm a movie person, and so usually when I'm preparing for a sermon, there's a movie or a show that stands out to me that I can connect with. And this time, as I was thinking about community and authentic community, one of the movies that jumped out to me was Avatar. And a lot of you, I'm sure, remember that movie when it came out. It was huge. It was kind of the first of its kind. It was visually stunning and lots of action and great storyline. And I just remember sitting in the theater and just being in awe, of the world that they built and kind of drew you into. But one of the things that really stood out to me from this film was the fact that the people in the film greeted each other and acknowledged each other with the phrase, "I see you." And I remember being struck by how powerful that three-word statement is. And I remember joking with friends, that whenever they share something deep or kind of revelatory, that, we would say, "I see you, I see you. I see, that you're trying to meet me and connect with me in this deep way." And as I was researching a little bit for today's message, I came across an article from this guy who traveled a lot, and he felt like the movie actually borrowed this from an actual community in Africa. And he wrote in his blog, about 20 years ago, I was on a safari in Africa. And as we traveled through the villages and through the Serengeti, I noticed a recurring event. When one of the indigenous people would approach another, they would pause, face each other, look directly into each other's eyes for 5 to 15 seconds, say something, and then continue on their way. And this would happen in populated villages and in very remote areas where there may be only one human for every 20 square miles. And after a couple of weeks of noticing this, I asked one of our guides from the Samburu tribe what the natives were doing, and he said they were greeting each other. And so I asked, well, how are they doing that? What are they saying? And he replied, one of them says, "I see you," connecting through the eyes. And the other replies, "I am here." And stop and think about that for a minute. I shared with the first service that I'm initially a little weirded out by that concept of, stop and staring somebody in the eye and be like, "I see you." And then to say, "I am here." And something about that was just so uncomfortable and awkward for me. I'm introverted by nature, so, that connection is hard for me anyway. But then I thought about the power in that as you're passing by, as you're going through your day, as you have your struggles, that there's someone that would stop and really look at you and say, "I see you, and I see what you're going through." And we always say the eyes are the windows to the soul. And so what it means to actually stop and look at somebody and try to see past, the walls and the barriers and the platitudes and all these things that we have to kind of keep you from connecting to the real me, the core of me, and to see what it is that they're about, their value, and who they are. And then not to run from that gaze, but to actually embrace it and move into it and say, "You know what? I see you too, and I'm here." But I believe that it makes us so uncomfortable because these two statements are at the heart of what it means to be true, authentic community. Authentic community says, "I see you, the whole of you, not the you that's behind the mask or the you that has a scripture response to every greeting, but I see the core of you." And the second part of authentic community says, "I don't run from your seeing, but I stand before you. I present myself. I'm fully present. I'm not withholding anything, but I'm lowering the walls and I'm letting down my guard enough for you to see me." And so it goes both ways. It's a seeing and it's a being seen, that we're active participants in both areas. And I thought about how powerful that would be and how transformational it would be for our relationships, particularly our marriages, because we go day to day, we're busy, we're in and out, and, we say hi, how was your day, but we don't really connect sometimes. But what if we were to stop what we were doing, to turn to our spouse and to look at them, for 5 to 15 seconds and say, "I see you," and to say that I am here. And even in our relationships with children, instead of asking, "Okay, did you get your chores done? Did you get your homework done? What practices do I have to take you to today?" That we actually stop and look at the children and say, "I see you. I see the pressures of day-to-day life. I see the weight that is on you, and I'm here for you." And looking into someone's eyes is an intimate gesture, and it moves you towards someone instead of keeping them at a distance. And I'm aware that in our culture, this type of openness and vulnerability feels strange and uncomfortable because from a young age, we're taught to hide the parts of ourselves that may be undesirable to others. Maybe you loved to talk as a child, and then you were constantly getting written up for being too chatty in class. And so we learn how to turn off that desire for connection and that desire, to build community from a young age. Or maybe you are a dreamer that you're always inventing something and coming up with a story, and everybody just kind of rolls their eyes like, here they go again. And that stops something in you, that flow of creativity, because you recognize that as something that maybe wasn't desirable to your community or the people that you are around. And maybe you were trusting or giving, and somebody took advantage of you. Throughout your life, and you said, well, maybe it's because I'm too open and too vulnerable that I gave this person the opportunity to treat me this way, and so you build those walls of distrust and distance. The circumstances in our lives sometimes have a way of dimming the light of our true selves so that we begin to accept the inauthentic relationships and the inauthentic community to the point where we become unable to live in the fullness of the calling that God has for us. And when we think about our calling and what it means, that everything that we've been given, everything that God has poured into us, every gift, everything that he's given, every talent is for the community. He never meant for you to have your talents and gifts in isolation. It's hard to lead worship if you have nobody to lead. It's hard to preach if you have nobody to hear. It's hard to teach if you have nobody who's learning from you. And so everything that's been placed inside of you, everything that you carry is meant for the community. And so the enemy fights hard against that community. He causes us to or puts us in situations that are going to raise these walls and keep us disconnected, because in that way it keeps us powerless, because we don't move into the community that God has for us. And so, thankfully, Scripture paints a different picture than society about what true community looks like. Way back in Genesis, we see how God communed freely with both Adam and Eve in such a way that their very nakedness wasn't even an issue because there was nothing hidden between them. And after the fall, sin entered that relationship and all others, and it created some obstacles to authentic community. And so human beings have this wrestling where we want to pursue deep, open, and honest relationships with others, but we're afraid that if our real self is exposed, that it'll run others off. And so we wear the masks. And unfortunately, church is an easy place for us to do that. Instead of talking about our struggles, our sadness, our fear, our doubt, our depression, our anxiety, our real hopes and our real dreams, our relationships and whether or not they're broken or whether or not they're healthy and functioning, if any sort of thing that's deep, we kind of put on that mask of spiritual platitudes and say, I'm okay, God's got it, everything will fall together. And those things are true, but it doesn't detract from the reality of the situation that they're living. And God doesn't call us to sugarcoat the circumstances that we're in. He doesn't call us to cover up the real pain that we're feeling, but he meets us in our pain. And that's his design and his purpose for our community, that we can share in each other's suffering, that we can share in each other's joys, that we can share in true life and what it means to be connected to a body. In Jesus' day and age, one of the things that kept people on the fringes of community was illness, whether mental, physical, or spiritual. And the Jews had a lot of rules about cleanliness and contamination and what you had to do in order to be accepted and valued in the community. And so someone who was sick often didn't have access to the temple or other places of gathering. And many times those suffering long-standing illnesses were considered to have offended God in some way or to be living in sin in some way, shape, or form. And because of that, people suffering with illnesses became outcasts of society, unseen and unknown, for fear that interaction with them might cause the uncleanliness to spread one to another. And unfortunately, this reminds me of some of the stigmas that we have around certain issues, in the church, that we kind of put up these walls and say, okay, if you're struggling with this, I'm willing to pray for you. I'm willing to try to cast it out. I'm willing to anoint you with oil. But after that, don't ask me to really walk with you, through this place of suffering. I'll say that quick prayer, we'll get that quick fix, and then we're going to move on to the next thing because I got stuff to do. And that's kind of the way that we approach community where, I can pray for you this one time, but don't really ask me to come alongside of you and to go with you on your journey. So how do we become a more authentic community? As we look at the text from John chapter 5, verses 1 through 17, Jesus gives us some insight as to how to bring other people and ourselves from the fringes of our communities to fully in the fold. And so I'll read these verses to you. It says, after these things, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now there in Jerusalem by the sheep gate, a pool, which is called in Hebrew Bethesda, having 5 porticos. And in these lay a multitude of those who were sick, blind, lame, and withered, waiting for the moving of the waters, for an angel of the Lord went down at certain seasons into the pool and stirred up the water. Whoever then first, after the stirring up of the water, stepped in and was made well from whatever disease with which he was afflicted. A man who was there had been ill for 38 years. And when Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had already been a long time in that condition, he said to him, "Do you wish to get well?" The sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no man to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up. But while I am coming, another steps down before me." Jesus said to him, "Get up, pick up your pallet and walk." Immediately the man became well and picked up his pallet and began to walk. And I'm going to skip down a little bit to verse 12. It says, they asked him, and he's talking about the Jews in this community, "Who is the man that said to you, 'Pick up your pallet and walk'?" But the man who was healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had slipped away while there was a crowd in that place. And afterward Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, "Behold, you have become well. Do not sin anymore, so that nothing worse happens to you." The man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus who made him well. And for this reason, the Jews were persecuting Jesus because he was doing these things on the Sabbath. But Jesus answered them, "My Father is working until now, and I myself am working." Now, I recognize that this is probably not a passage that you would expect in a conversation about community, but if we dig a little bit deeper, Jesus' interactions with this man are revealing as to the barriers that can keep us from authenticity. As these verses set the scene, we see that this man has been ill for 38 years. And I imagine he spent many of those years, day after day, waiting for someone, anyone, to help him get healed. His illness keeps him from entering the pool on his own, and so he's almost trapped just feet from the place of his healing. And it's interesting that the story doesn't give us much about his family situation, but to think in 38 years, not a mother, not a father, not a cousin, no one has come to help this man get to the pool first. And so you get the feeling that he's probably a little bit jaded by this point, a little disappointed in his community, and maybe he's still trusting and still believing God, but his faith is probably starting to wane because it's been 38 years that he's been sitting by this pool waiting for something to happen, and nothing has yet. And so this is where I see Jesus first engaging this man with a confrontation with truth. He sees his illness, and he already knows that the man has been sick for a long time, but he doesn't focus on the physical ailment. Instead, he goes straight to the matter of the man's heart, asking him, "Do you wish to get well?" And I believe in this moment that Jesus recognizes that there's something in this man's heart that although he desires healing, although he desires wholeness, that there's a barrier there that he's not quite aware of that's keeping him from getting to his healing. Because unlike Jesus, I wouldn't have asked this question. I would have just assumed it's been 38 years, that he's been dealing with this. Of course, who wouldn't want healing? But Jesus recognized something, and the man's response even is very telling as to kind of what Jesus was trying to get at. He responds to Jesus, "Sir, I have no man to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up. But while I'm coming, another one steps down before me." And it's interesting because what he's speaking of here is his community. He's saying, "Jesus, I have no community to help me get my healing." And Jesus is offering this man the opportunity to be fully healed, whole, and restored to his life. But the man hesitates because his past history has told him that nobody's going to come alongside of him. Nobody's going to be a help to him, and he's forever going to stay in this place. And it's interesting to note here that the verb wish that Jesus uses when he asks the question is not only about the desire of the heart for something, but it's the willingness to act in favor of this desire. Jesus was asking this man essentially, can you put your money where your mouth is? Do you really want this thing that you're asking for? And are you willing to be vulnerable enough to take that step and to walk out in faith and to receive the help that I can give you? And I believe it's the same with us. Sometimes we become so comfortable and complacent in our broken relationships, in our inauthentic community, in our past hurts. And while we claim that we want what's real, we claim that we want everybody to be 100% with us all the time, whatever the case may be, when we're actually presented with that opportunity for authentic community, and we realize that it requires action on our part and vulnerability on our part, we're like, pump the brakes. We start to make excuses, just like this man did. Well, I want authentic community, but I know these people are just going to talk about me behind my back. And so I would share with them, but I know what kind of people they are, so I'm not going to engage them in that way. I want a church that's real, but at the same time, I'm not actually willing to tell people what I'm going through because I know somebody's going to judge me for my experiences. And I experienced a similar confrontation with truth in a very real way just a few weeks ago. As some of you know, and maybe others of you are finding out for the first time, my husband Mike and I are expecting our first child, which we're excited about. And early on in our pregnancy, the doctor noticed that I had this cyst forming in my right ovary. And at first, she wasn't really concerned about it. She was like, we'll just monitor it and kind of see what's going on. So she sent me in for some testing. And then we came back in for a follow-up appointment. And then her face was just completely different. The next time we went in, and she told me that there was a high possibility that the cyst that was on my ovary could possibly be a tumor, and that it may be ovarian cancer. And it was likely that I would have to go through a surgery that would be risky to the pregnancy. And worst case scenario, it could cause me to lose both ovaries and my chance to have children at all. And needless to say, Mike and I were heartbroken. We went from looking at our baby in the ultrasound, and he is healthy, and and the doctor is telling us, the baby's meeting all the requirements, it's growing this way and growing that way, and the baby seemed to have Mike's head, and we were laughing about that we could tell that from the ultrasound so soon. And then to go from that environment to now she's saying the doctor is probably going to talk to you about termination. And it was so hard to believe that what was meant to be one of the best moments of our life, that we could go so fast from joy to pain. And I was faced with a choice because I'm not very good at community, to be honest. I like to keep things close to the chest. I don't really like to share much. I'm comfortable kind of hiding in the back. I usually work in cafes, so being up here is very, very different for me. And I like that. I like kind of fading into the background. But I just kept feeling this still small voice saying that you can choose to remain where you are. You can choose to remain isolated. You can choose to carry this burden yourself, or you can share it with your community. And that was hard for me. I'm not good at being vulnerable. I'm not good at sharing of myself in that way, but I felt like I needed to reach out. And so Mike and I, we shared the situation with our parents and some close friends. We talked to Pastor Chuck and Maggie and some of the leaders of the church, and they prayed for us, and they surrounded us with love, and they didn't ask a lot of questions, but they just said, we're here for you. They said, I see you, and I'm here. And that week was one of the hardest weeks of my life, as we wrestled with, what's going to happen, as we waited for that follow-up appointment with the doctor and wondered, God, what are you doing in our lives? But we had to trust that he was doing something, and when I couldn't pray for myself, when I couldn't find the words to speak, when I couldn't find the faith to say, God, this is all going to turn out okay, it was my community that surrounded me and wrapped me up and held me up and lifted me before the throne, and that made all the difference. It was my community that told me to look to the hills from whence cometh my help. It was my community that said that I could be persecuted, that I could be crushed, that I could be pressed down, but I could never be destroyed because God was on my side. It was my community that said I would have fainted unless I believed to see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. My community prayed for me. My pastors prayed for me. My family prayed for me. They pulled my husband and I into the pool where we could be healed. But that wouldn't have happened if I wasn't able to confront my truth. That something in me was broken, that past hurts, that past experiences would try to keep me from venturing out and to moving deeper into community. I could have let my stuff keep me from my healing. And that's what Jesus was trying to communicate to this man, that you can let your stuff cause you to stay where you are, but I have something greater for you. If you would just connect with the people that I have placed around you, that there are gifts inside of them, that there is encouragement inside of them, that there is power inside of them that you need, but you won't get if you stay isolated and you stay apart and you keep on the mask that keeps that barrier going. And so while I had to take the first step and put myself out there, my community surrounded me and they responded to my needs with compassion. And that's the next part that we see in this scripture, that Jesus doesn't just ask this man this question and pull the truth out of him and then say, okay, bye. You know, he didn't leave him in that place, but he spoke to him and he said, arise, take up your pallet and walk. And we're told that the man immediately took up his pallet and walked. And Jesus didn't leave this man alone in his pain and his suffering, but he had compassion on him. He gave of his own resources and his own power so that this man might be healed. And that's what he calls us to do as authentic community, that we don't just hear a need and walk by it. That we don't hear somebody share something deep with us and then put up that wall and say, okay, I'll catch you next week. But that we move towards them and say, there's a resource that God has given me that will help me meet the need that you have. And so I love that Pastor Chuck, it wasn't planned, but today, it was on his heart to have people raise their hands who are in need of prayer and in need of something, and then have the community surround them and give them hope and encouragement and to pray for them. Because that's what authentic community is all about. It says, I'll walk with you on this journey, no matter how bleak it seems, no matter how painful, no matter how dark. And I'll hold you up when you can't hold yourself up. And so true community compels us to do the same. And I'm thankful that I'm part of a church that will hold me up in that way. And as the story goes on, we see that the man tells others about his miraculous healing, but some of the responses to that news aren't very celebratory. The Jews are taking issue with the fact that, okay, you were healed and that's great and all, but it wasn't done in the proper way. You're carrying your pallet on the Sabbath day, and we just can't have that. So it's great that 38 years of pain is over, but we need to talk about the fact that you're carrying, this pallet, that you're celebrating your healing on the Sabbath day. And Jesus advocates for this man, and he says, you know what? Sometimes rules and regulations and stipulations don't matter as much as someone receiving the healing that they need. That I'm willing to step outside the framework of religiosity to meet you where you are and to respond to your need with compassion and to heal you, even if it means that everybody else is going to talk about me a certain type of way. And so he says, my Father is working till now, and I myself am working also. The work doesn't stop. It doesn't end. That our work as community, our work to grow, our work to be authentic, it's a constant thing. It's a constant thing. And so as we close today, I recognize that I have more work to do in each of these areas. But I'm committed to building authentic community, not only in my own life, but at Vive as well, because of that, I'm not only desirous, like this man was, to receive his healing, but I'm willing to take the action. I'm willing to confront the truths that cause us to keep the barriers up. I'm willing to respond to your needs with compassion, and I'm willing to advocate for you, to let you know that I see you and that I am here. Would you stand with me as we pray? Dear Lord God, I'm so grateful that you are Jehovah Roi. You are not only the God who sees, but you are the God who will see to it that there is something that happens when we are authentically seen by not only you, but by others. And I pray that you give us the strength and the courage to tear down the walls that keep us separate. I just think of how you rent the veil that kept us distant from the Father and allowed us to come into close relationship with you. And I just see you doing that now in the lives of our church, that you are rending the veil that would keep us apart and that would keep us distant, that would keep us inauthentic. And I pray that we would move into that place of community, of authenticity and truth, that we might confront each other with the truth of our stories, that we might respond to one another with compassion, and that we might advocate for one another in our communities. Bless the people that are in this room. Continue to draw us together. In your name we pray. Amen.